China had around 1,100 wild giant pandas left in the 1980s. Today, that number stands at approximately 1,900, and the species, Ailuropoda melanoleuca, has been downgraded from endangered to vulnerable on the IUCN Red List for the first time in decades. This is the story of how they did it, what it actually cost, and why the scientists who saved the panda are still worried. The giant panda lives on a diet that would baffle most animals, between 26 and 84 pounds of bamboo per day, depending on which part of the plant they're eating, and bamboo is almost the only thing they eat. Arrow bamboo, species of the genus Fargesia, makes up a significant portion of that diet across much of their range, and it's a plant that flowers, seeds, and dies in mass die-off events that can strip an entire mountain range of food within a few years. Their digestive system never fully adapted to plant matter, which means they absorb only about 17% of the nutrients in each mouthful, and so they spend most of their waking hours eating just to stay alive. Their reproductive rate makes the situation worse. A female panda is fertile for roughly 72 hours per year. Cubs are born blind and weigh about 100 grams, roughly the weight of a stick of butter, while the mother weighs around 110 kilograms. That biological gap between parent and offspring is one of the largest of any mammal on Earth, and it means that even under good conditions, wild panda populations grow slowly. By the 1980s, the combination of habitat loss and fragmentation had pushed the wild population down to roughly 1,100 animals, scattered across 6 mountain ranges in the provinces of Sichuan, Shaanxi, and Gansu in central and western China. These weren't connected populations, they were isolated fragments, cut off from each other by roads, farms, rivers, and settlements, and that isolation carried its own risk entirely separate from the number of animals. A population of 20 pandas that cannot reach another group of pandas, cannot exchange genetic material, and small isolated groups tend toward inbreeding, reduced fertility, and eventually local extinction. China's conservation response began not with a single dramatic intervention, but with decades of incremental infrastructure. The first panda nature reserve opened in 1963. Wulong National Nature Reserve, established in 1975 in Sichuan province, became the most prominent of these early reserves and would later serve as the primary site for captive breeding research. By 2018, the number of reserves had grown to 67. Protected habitat expanded from 1.39 million hectares in the 1980s to 2.58 million hectares, and the fourth national census, completed in 2015, found 1,864 wild pandas, a 16.8% increase from the previous survey that ended in 2003. That census, which took 4 years to complete and covered the entire wild range, gave researchers the first reliable picture of where pandas actually lived, and, more critically, which populations were in danger of disappearing quietly without anyone noticing. 15 of the 33 isolated populations faced an extinction risk greater than 90% based on population modeling published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. An estimated 259 animals lived in 25 of the smallest groups, around 14% of the total wild population, in groups too small to sustain themselves over any meaningful time horizon. A group of 10 pandas in a mountain range with no connection to any other panda population is functionally closer to extinction than the raw number suggests. The answer China settled on was scale, not more reserves managed independently, but one unified landscape. In October 2021, China officially established the Giant Panda National Park, covering 22,000 square kilometers across Sichuan, Shaanxi, and Gansu. The park absorbs 73 previously isolated nature reserves and provides protection to roughly 70% of all wild panda habitat. What made it different from what came before was the deliberate construction of ecological corridors, physical passages of restored bamboo forest connecting previously separated populations. Grazing was banned inside these corridors, herb collection for traditional medicine was prohibited, and local governments planted bamboo and erected noise barriers to reduce human disturbance. By the time of the Global Panda Partners Conference held in Chengdu in November 2025, Liu Guohong, Director of China's State Forestry and Grassland Administration, confirmed that annual wild panda sightings in the park's Sichuan section had increased from 135 to 185 since the park's establishment. The park currently protects approximately 1,340 wild giant pandas and also functions as a sanctuary for over 8,000 other rare and sympatric species, including snow leopards, red pandas, golden snub-nosed monkeys, and Tibetan macaques. The panda, in this sense, operates as what conservation biologists call both an umbrella species and a flagship species, one whose protection automatically benefits a broader range of wildlife sharing the same habitat, and whose global recognition attracts the funding and political will to make that protection possible. A study published in NPJ Biodiversity in September 2025 confirmed that panda reserves enhance habitat suitability for most wildlife species in the area, with the strongest benefits recorded for ungulates, and that these spillover effects extended to areas adjacent to the reserves as well. None of this happened without controversy or without significant international partnership. The World Wildlife Fund, whose logo is a giant panda, has been involved in panda conservation since the 1980s, and the species' global profile helped transform the WWF into one of the most recognizable conservation organizations on Earth. A feedback loop between conservation and brand that has channeled substantial resources into the field. The legal scaffolding for international protection came through CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, which has listed the giant panda under its most restrictive category since 1984, effectively prohibiting commercial trade in pandas or their parts across borders. When the IUCN downgraded the giant panda from endangered to vulnerable in September 2016, pointing to the 17% population increase documented between 2003 and 2014, China's own State Forestry Administration publicly contested the decision. If we downgrade their conservation status or neglect or relax our conservation work, the administration told the Associated Press, the populations and habitats of giant pandas could still suffer irreversible loss and our achievements would be quickly lost. The concern was not that the numbers were wrong. It was that a downgrade in international status would reduce the urgency felt by donors, policymakers, and the public. And that reduced urgency would eventually translate into reduced funding and reduced protection. China maintained the panda on its own national endangered species list for 5 more years after the IUCN downgrade, finally updating its domestic classification in 2021. The tension between the official story and the scientific reality runs through the panda's conservation history in ways that matter for how we read the progress. The wild population has genuinely grown, from roughly 1,100 in the 1980s to approximately 1,900 today. That is a real increase, but a PNAS study published in August 2024, which sequenced the genomes of 612 giant pandas, found that habitat fragmentation had accelerated, not slowed, and that 33 isolated populations remain a persistent structural problem. Approximately 70% of those 33 local populations face extinction risk, according to research published in 2024. The corridors being built inside the Giant Panda National Park connect 13 of those populations, which leaves 20 unconnected, and the smallest groups remain biologically vulnerable, regardless of whether a road or a fence physically separates them from larger groups. Captive breeding has run alongside the wild recovery effort and produced results of its own. The global captive panda population grew from 164 animals in 2003 to 808 by 2025. The Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding, alongside the China Conservation and Research Center for the Giant Panda at Wolong, houses the majority of those animals and represents the operational core of the captive program. Research published in 2024 confirmed that the current captive population can maintain 90% of its genetic diversity for up to 200 years, which gives the captive program a long runway as a genetic backstop for the species. 46 pandas were successfully bred in captivity in 2023 alone, and the genetic diversity among captive animals has improved steadily as breeding programs have become more sophisticated. All captive pandas and their offspring outside China are considered on loan from the Chinese government, a system referred to as panda diplomacy. The loans typically cost around $1 million per pair per year. The cubs born abroad are repatriated to China, and the program has served simultaneously as a conservation tool, a diplomatic instrument, and a source of substantial revenue. At the end of 2024, only 4 giant pandas remained in the United States. Housed at Zoo Atlanta after Washington's National Zoo returned its pandas to China following a high-profile loan arrangement. Japan hosted 9 pandas at that time, with only 1 owned outright by the Japanese government. The climate threat to giant pandas operates through bamboo. Pandas consume bamboo almost exclusively, and bamboo, including the arrow bamboo species of the Qinling and Minshan ranges, is sensitive to temperature and precipitation shifts in ways that could make currently suitable habitat unsuitable, or force bamboo to migrate to higher altitudes faster than pandas can follow. Some climate models project that habitat in the Qinling Mountains, home to roughly 17% of all wild pandas, could contract by 49 to 85% by 2080, when climate change is modeled as the dominant variable. Other modeling studies that incorporate a broader range of factors, including human activity, agricultural pressure, and conservation intervention, find more moderate projected outcomes. A study published in 2024 projecting bamboo habitat to 2100 found that giant panda habitat in Sichuan province could actually expand between 17 and 60% under certain climate scenarios, potentially supporting up to 6,533 pandas. The range of outcomes in these models is wide enough that the honest answer is that nobody knows exactly what climate change will do to panda habitat, and the uncertainty itself is a reason to maintain conservation pressure rather than reduce it. 1,900 wild giant pandas, Ailuropoda melanoleuca, exist today. The number is higher than it was 40 years ago, the trend is positive, and the national park established in 2021 represents the largest and most coherent conservation infrastructure the species has ever had. But 70% of its 33 isolated populations remain at extinction risk. Habitat fragmentation has accelerated even as the total population grew. The corridors being built are real, but incomplete, and climate change adds a layer of risk that no amount of bamboo planting fully addresses. The IUCN called the downgrade to vulnerable proof that conservation works, and that is true. China's State Forestry Administration called it premature, and that is also true. Both things can be right at the same time, and the story of the giant panda is most useful precisely when held in that tension, as a genuine conservation success that has not yet finished proving itself.